Rev up your engines!
Well, we're at it now. The United States is now setting a 55 mile per gallon rule for cars that are built in 2026. So by 2026, the cars are supposed to get 55 miles a gallon. And of course, the baloney merchants who are in power now say, this will save Americans money. It'll save drivers between $200 billion and $400 billion a year in gasoline. Yeah. What a fantasy this stuff is, right? Save. There's no such thing as saving. It's like an advertiser tell you, look, you buy this, you'll save. No, you aren't. You're spending money, right? They're basing it on the miles per gallon now versus this future fantasy of 55 miles a gallon, right? You're going to save all this money, fuel costs. Let's see what you're really saving. You're not saving anything. That kind of money, even if it was, let's say, $400 billion, right? Americans won't be saving anything. You would have to spend, all the Americans would have to spend trillions of dollars buying these new cars, right, to get that gas mileage. It's like I've told people for ages, should I get a new car? You know, my car only gets 25 miles a gallon. This gets 35 miles a gallon. And I say, okay, you're going to spend 35 to 40 grand for that new car. That buys an awful lot of gasoline for the car you already have that's paid for. So this fantasy that you're going to be saving money is just a load of economic hogwash. Then to top it all off, who's to say Americans are going to buy those cars? The only cars that can get 55 miles a gallon are tiny cars that don't weigh much. Can you force Americans to buy those kinds of cars? No, you can't. And of course, these are new cars. People can continue to buy the old cars. There's no way they can't buy the old cars and fix them up, right? Unless they're going to make laws for that next. And they say things like, well, even factoring in the higher cost of a car, a new car, over the life of the car, you'll save $1,000 a year. Baloney, because you got to buy the new car. They're saying, well, yes, these fancy cars cost this much more than the other cars, but they're not even factoring the original cost of the car. So they're saying, well, this car costs $8,000 more in over 10 years. About baloney. The whole cost of the car is going to be probably $30,000 to $60,000. They're not even including the principal. That's what all these fantasy land economic theorists are. They find a little niche that makes it look like you're saving money. No, you aren't. You're spending a small fortune. Like my father taught me years ago. Don't worry about the interest. Worry about the principal. If some guy's claiming 8% interest on your investment, worry about the principal. Is it safe? Well, that's not guaranteed. No, you want to worry about your big chunk, not the little chunk. And yeah, you're saving a little chunk on fuel, but if you got to spend 50, 60 grand on a car, you are not saving anything. And they never put this into the equation when they're talking about it. They find their little nitpicky thing that makes them look good. And then in the real world, we all sit back and say, wow, we had to buy this thing. It cost a whole bunch of money. These theories these people come up with. And they say, well, you got to get 55 miles a gallon. But who's to say it can be done, you know? Who's to say it can be done with cars that the average American wants? Look at the average American. They're nuts about SUVs and trucks now. Those get horrible gas mileage. Oh, what are you going to say? You can't drive them now? You know what'll happen if they say that? Then the people will vote those politicians out and vote in people that'll let them drive their SUVs. And of course, now with this thing, they don't even know if they're going to pass the stimulus budget. What actually comes out, 2026, you know, 5 years from now, who knows what's actually going to be on? Who's even going to be in power then? The Trump administration did certain things. Then the Biden administration came in and turned that over. Well, when he gets thrown out, then somebody else will come and they'll probably turn that stuff all over again. Now, I got to say, I feel sorry for the car manufacturers because they got to follow what these clowns are saying. And then all of a sudden, oh, it's changed. We don't have to do that now. So who knows what's actually going to come out of it. But the figures they're giving are all a bunch of nonsense anyways. Here we go with Audi's lack of quality. They're recalling 300,000 Q5s, SQ5s, and Sportback models. Because, guess what? They didn't glue them together right. No, I'm not making this up. A lot of these have aluminum frames, aluminum everything, right? Well, they found that they can actually glue them together with super high tech like polyurethane sealer. 50 times stronger than the crap you can buy, right? Well, it turns out that they put insufficient seam sealer on a body seam so water can get in, ruin the control module, which you could get the engine stopping, and you could crash. I guess this is what happens when you glue cars together and you're cheap on the glue. You know, they're even trying to save on how much glue they use putting these things together. Now, it's a 2021 to 2022 Q5 Sportback, the Q5, the SQ5. Now, the module's called a gateway control module, and as you can imagine, it's the gateway to just about everything in the car. And it lives under the back seat. Now, their supposed fix is to put a protective cover on the module, think plastic bag, and then properly sealing the vehicle's underside if they didn't have enough sealant. Well, here's something that I gotta say. Cheap way of fixing the car incorrectly. They're sealing all this stuff together with glue, right? If there's not enough and it's leaking through, who's to say that isn't gonna structurally impede the integrity of the whole frame and everything? Of course, they're not gonna put new frames on these cars. It would cost them a fortune. So we'll stick some glue on there, put a plastic bag around your control module. And they talk about their high-tech, great technology, the Germans, right? I mean, I was amazed years ago when I saw the first Audi that was in a wreck that had the aluminum frame that was all glued together with sealant, right? A friend of mine ran a body shop. He said, look at this guy. I looked at it. He said, it just all blew up, came apart. He says, yeah, this is the end of the car. You can't fix it. So they totaled the car. Otherwise, the car, you know, was a nice car. You got a frame that's glued together and you get in a big wreck and it pops apart. You can say goodbye to the car, you know? I mean, there's a reason we used to use steel in cars. It was strong. You could weld it. Audi's case, they're not using enough glue. It just amazes me. It goes on with Audi. I mean, I tell people they're endless money pits. If you don't listen to me and you buy one, well, don't say I didn't warn you, because I'm warning you right now again. Chris T.T. Boda says, Scotty, is the Hugo the worst car ever made? What's your stance on this? In Eastern Europe, we used to have cars like the Altsit, which are probably worse. I'm interested. Not the worst car ever made. They're junky little runabout cars. You know, they're called Hugo because they were made in what used to be called Yugoslavia, right? They got like the 70s Fiats molds. They bought them from Fiat, and then they moved them to Yugoslavia and built them. They would probably still build them today. It wasn't for the wars that they had, because when they had those wars, the bombing destroyed the Hugo factory, and nobody was going to put any money into it. I mean, they got all the old molds from Italy, so they didn't build them themselves. They got them from Italy, so they couldn't make their own molds and stuff. They were kind of junky little cars, but they ran. You know, I know guys in Canada, they're still driving some of those things around. If you don't mind a little crap bucket car with a standard transmission that, you know, doesn't go all that fast, but if you took care of them, so like anything else, they could run. In those Eastern Bloc countries, a lot of times, hey, it was drive something like that or walk. So I would rather drive something like that than walk too, especially there. It gets cold and rainy in the winter, right? But they weren't the greatest cars. They were a complete failure in the United States, too small, couldn't get out of their own way. And, you know, I mean, let's face it, Americans all want automatic transmissions. Those things would be useless with automatic transmissions. So, you know, they never made a hit over here. But other places, people use them. I know guys in Canada, they're still driving the things that are car nuts, and they think if I drive a Hugo, it's kind of a badge of honor that they're still driving one of those little clunkers around. Taylor 0103 says, Scotty, I need to know if I got a bad battery or alternator. I got an 05 Ford Focus. A week ago, the battery light came on. I went to AutoZone. They said it was my alternator. Makes sense. My battery's a year old. So they tested my battery and alternator at another place, and they say the battery's weak, but the alternator is fine. The alternator's charging 14.1 to 14.6. But the battery was only charging at 9 volts. All right, if your alternator, they tested your alternator, and it was putting out 14.1 to 14.6 volts. It should be working okay, but it's got to be tested, everything. Not just the volts, the amps, the diodes have to be tested. Everybody today has machines. Years ago, I had one of the first fancy Medtronics machines that are like $900. We tested them all in about 1 minute, right? But today, you can buy that same stuff made in China that works perfectly fine for 80 or 90 bucks instead of 900. Electronics have moved on, cheaper and better, right? If they tested that alternator correctly, the alternator was charging that much, but at the battery, you're only getting 9 volts. Only two things could be wrong. Either your battery was shorting out, and it was only showing 9 volts because it was shorting out, or there was a wiring problem between the battery and the alternator. The first thing I'd do would be check the wiring between the battery and the alternator, because if that's bad, it won't charge. Now, actually testing the battery is a very simple thing. What you do is, if you don't want to buy one of these $90 machines, you go to any auto parts store, a guy like me, we take the battery terminals off the car. Take them off. That negates everything else except the battery. We put our battery tester on the battery, and it tells us the truth. It'll tell us whether the battery is good, weak, needs recharging, or needs replacing. Now, let's say I tested it and said, well, your battery's good, but it needs recharging. And it showed the alternator charging the alternator. I know there was a wiring problem between the battery and the alternator, and that's why it wasn't recharging. Well, you got to have it all disconnected and test the battery alone. Start there. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.